The year is 922. On the banks of the Volga River, 6 Viking warriors wait in shadow. A young girl enters the tent. She knows what comes next. She has seen this ceremony before, but never from this position. Her name is Sigrid, though history will not remember it. An Arab traveler will write only that she was young, that she had served the dead chieftain, and that she volunteered to follow him into the afterlife. By the time the 6th warrior finishes, Sigrid no longer speaks of seeing visions. The old woman they call the Angel of Death approaches with the rope and the blade, one for strangling, one for certainty. Outside, the crowd begins to sing louder to hide the sounds inside the tent. In 10 minutes, Sigrid will burn on the chieftain's funeral ship, a slave even in death. She will become smoke, memory, and nothing. But Sigrid was lucky. She knew when her suffering would end. Most captured women never did. The Vikings did not simply take slaves. They built an architecture of human suffering that chroniclers from Arabia, Byzantium, and Europe all described as something unprecedented in human cruelty. They didn't just participate in the slave trade, they perfected it, creating a system of brutal efficiency that commodified women on a scale the world had not yet seen. This was the engine that powered their expansion, a truth far darker than the sagas of heroic explorers. June 8, 793, the holy island of Lindisfarne off the coast of Northumbria. Sister Ethelred was copying manuscripts when the first screams began. Moments later, the monastery burned. Viking warriors stormed through the halls, and for the women of Lindisfarne, life as human beings ended that day. They were dragged from their scriptorium, their world of quiet devotion shattered by the clash of iron and the stench of fear. The sacred texts they had so carefully illuminated were trampled underfoot, their value insignificant next to the new commodity the raiders had come for, human flesh. 40 women were packed into the belly of a ship meant for 20, no food for 2 days. Water only when waves splashed over the sides. They licked the wood to survive. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the groans of the dying and the relentless creaking of the ship's hull. The air grew thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and despair. By the 5th day, 2 were dead. By the 8th, Sister Ethelred had stopped praying. God seemed very far away in the suffocating hold of a Viking longship. Her faith, once a fortress, had crumbled into dust, replaced by the primal, desperate will to draw one more breath. When they reached Norway, the women were divided by value: those who could work, those who could breed, and those who would be sold. Stripped naked and inspected like livestock, their former identities were erased. Ethelred, once a respected scholar, was now just another set of hands, her worth measured by the strength of her back and the width of her hips. This brutal calculus was the foundation of the Viking economy, a cold, hard system where a woman's life was reduced to her function. The Viking slave trade stretched from Ireland to Constantinople, a network that turned human lives into currency. It was a vast and sophisticated enterprise, a spider's web of trade routes that crisscrossed the known world. From the icy fjords of Scandinavia, longships carried their human cargo to bustling slave markets in Dublin, Kiev, and even the glittering cities of the Abbasid Caliphate. This was not a side venture. For many Vikings, it was the primary source of wealth, more valuable than pillaged gold or silver. Older women became laborers, grinding grain until their hands twisted into claws. They toiled from sunrise to sunset in the fields or at the grinding stone, their bodies broken by relentless, unpaid labor. Younger women were forced into breeding, their children born into the same chains. They were concubines, their purpose to produce more slaves for their masters, their bodies a resource to be exploited. A child born to a thrall woman was a thrall, regardless of the father's status. It was a self-perpetuating system of misery. And the most beautiful? They were cleaned, perfumed, and taught languages to be sold to the highest bidder. In Dublin, in Kiev, in Baghdad. These women were the luxury goods of the Viking world, their price escalating with their rarity and exoticism. An Irish redhead or a Slavic blonde could fetch a fortune in the markets of the Middle East. This was not random brutality, it was business. The Vikings industrialized slavery centuries before the Atlantic trade. They refined the logistics of human trafficking, creating a model of chilling efficiency that would be imitated for centuries to come. The auction block in Dublin stood 15 feet high. Princess Orlith stood naked beneath the sun. She was the daughter of an Irish king, captured in a raid that had annihilated her family and her kingdom. Now, shivering and exposed, she was a spectacle for a crowd of merchants, raiders, and chieftains. Her royal blood didn't matter, it just raised her price. The auctioneer listed her qualities in a dozen languages, her lineage just another selling point, like the color of her eyes or the strength of her teeth. By the time bidding ended, she was sold for 24 marks of silver, bought by a trader bound for the east. The sum, a fortune at the time, was the final, brutal quantification of her life. She was no longer a princess, no longer even a person, but a highly valued piece of property. That same market processed thousands of women every month. Dublin was not just a Viking port. It was the beating heart of medieval human trafficking, a central hub where the arteries of the slave trade converged, pumping a relentless flow of human misery across the globe. At Iceland's Great Assembly, the law speaker stood before the crowd and declared, "A thrall woman's body belongs entirely to her master. She cannot refuse his use. Her children belong to him as well." These weren't unspoken customs, they were codified laws, the legal bedrock of their society. The Gragas, the Icelandic law codes, explicitly detailed the complete and total ownership a master held over his female slaves, removing any shred of autonomy or personhood. If she was killed, the crime was not murder, it was property damage. Her death required compensation in silver, nothing more. The penalty was paid to her owner for the loss of his asset, not to her family for the loss of a life. Her existence was legally equivalent to that of a cow or a sheep. This legal framework ensured that the system of slavery was not just practiced, but protected, woven into the very fabric of Norse society. Generations were born and died inside this system. Children inherited slavery from their mothers, a curse written into law. A child's fate was sealed at birth, determined not by their potential or their spirit, but by the legal status of the woman who bore them. Even love could not free them. A free man could father a child with a slave, but that child was still property. Freedom could not pass through the father's blood. Only slavery could pass through the mother's. This matrilineal inheritance of bondage was a cruel and efficient mechanism for ensuring a permanent, hereditary underclass. But not all women were taken as slaves, some were taken as wives. The daughters of conquered kings and chieftains became tools of political absorption. These were not romantic unions, they were strategic transactions, acts of conquest by other means. To marry the daughter of a defeated enemy was to claim his legacy and legitimize the new order. Brianna, an Irish noblewoman, was forced to marry the Viking who had killed her father 3 days before. Her wedding took place in the same hall where his blood still stained the floor. Her consent was irrelevant. She was a political prize, her body a bridge between her people's past and their subjugated future. Her marriage was a symbol of her clan's defeat, a daily reminder of who now held the power. Across Scotland, Francia, and Saxony, this pattern repeated for generations. Daughters of the defeated became brides of their conquerors. Their bodies used to merge bloodlines and erase the memory of resistance. The practice, known as peace weaving, in a bitter irony, was anything but peaceful for the women involved. They were hostages in their own homes, their lives dedicated to bearing children for the men who had destroyed their world. Their children looked like their mothers, but thought like their fathers. They became the bridge between destruction and dominance. Their mixed heritage a living testament to the Viking strategy of absorbing and transforming the cultures they overran. The Vikings built ships that conquered oceans, but beneath their sails they carried something darker. An empire not of gold, but of human lives. And among those lives were the women. Sigrid, Ethelred, Bridget, Marie, Isabel, Marguerite, Orleth, Brianna. Nameless thousands whose suffering fueled the engine of an age. Their voices were erased, their stories buried beneath sagas of conquest and glory. The epic poems and runestones celebrate the warriors, the explorers, the chieftains who amassed great wealth. They do not speak of the women whose bodies were the currency of that wealth, whose tears were the mortar of that empire. But history remembers, even when the world tries to forget. The evidence is there, in the cold clauses of their laws, in the accounts of foreign chroniclers, and in the DNA of modern populations. If you believe history should be told in full, not just the glory, but the truth, please like this video, subscribe for more deep history documentaries, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Because every story of the past deserves to be remembered.